religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now,
Nick Pitts.
And hello, everyone. On this December 4th, 2017 day, I am Nick Pitts here for Point of View. And happy National Cookie Day. We are so excited that you've decided to join us this morning on Point of View. And we've got quite a show for you today coming out of the weekend. There is so much that's happening. If you are a college football fan, there's much to chagrin right now, especially for Alabama fans are celebrating because they got included in on the top of the college football playoff. But then there was others that got left out, i.e. Ohio State, Wisconsin, et cetera, et cetera. But we've got a great show for you today. We're going to be talking about everything from what's happening in Congress right now to the tax reform plan that's been put out that the House of Representatives right now will vote later on today, whether they will move into a conference committee where they'll try to reconcile both the House and the Senate bills. And we'll talk about some of the differences between the House and Senate bills and how are we to think about this from a biblical perspective. What would be the Jesus way as we try to figure out what it looks like just to bless the nations as well as to be able to bless others in our world today. And then we'll also talk about, are we addicted to our phones? There's been new research out that indicates that we are increasingly addicted to our phones. This kind of builds upon some of the research by Gene Twenge that kind of indicates that there's a kind of a likelihood and a correlation to the more that we look at screens, the less likely we are to be happy. How are we to be able to think about all this? And then obviously we'll be taking your phone calls as well. So you can call in at 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. We'll be taking your phone calls all morning, this morning from 9 to 11, and looking forward to having you join us, as well as, because I'm the millennial here. I host the Millennial Roundtable on Wednesdays. We'll also be on Facebook taking some of your comments. So you can log on to facebook.com/pointofviewradio and leave your comments there. We'll be getting to those throughout the program today, and we would love to be able to see that from you as well. And so without further ado, we are going to jump right into it. We're celebrating 45 years at Point of View this week. This is just one of those celebratory weeks that in 1972, because of the foresight and the leadership of Marlon Maddox, he started this program. And there's been so much that's happened, so much that's changed. We'll have John Clemens on as a guest later on in the show. And he actually was a co-host with Marlon Maddox for 14 years. But so much has changed since 1972. I thought I might give us a couple of examples of some things that have changed. So, for example, a pair of Wrangler jeans cost $12 back in 1972. And many of you were singing along to Grease, do-a-diddy-diddy-dum-diddy-doo, and as it made its Broadway debut back in 1972. For you video game aficionados, Pong was introduced in 1972. There was so much that was happening in 1972, and so much has changed during that time. But one of the beautiful things that hasn't changed is Point of View's steadfastness over these past 45 years. For the past 45 years, Point of View has sought to be a voice that's defending faith, family, and freedom. It's sought to be a voice in the midst of the craziness, to be able to offer up and embody the invitation that the good Lord has given to us in Isaiah 1:18 to come and let us reason together, to think about these issues of the day and try to consider these in a thoughtful as well as a biblical perspective. And throughout all these years, there's been so many guests and so many individuals that have been a part of that. And one of those is we'd like to highlight for you is when Marlon Maddox interviewed Lady Margaret Thatcher.
Lady Thatcher, for years during what's called the Cold War, we were fed a daily diet of mutual assured destruction, détente, that we should not offend the communists. If they've gained the country, we don't take it back. And then a fellow named Ronald Reagan came along, And he totally disagreed with that. He said we need to challenge them. He had the nerve to call it the evil empire. And the American people responded to that. During the same period of time, across the ocean, Lady Thatcher was saying basically the same thing. Tell us about your relationship to Ronald Reagan. The two of you must have agreed on so much.
I saw him when I was leader of the opposition, and he came over to make a marvelous speech at the Institute of Directors, and I knew his views. But I also had come to them independently. It is weakness that invites wars. We knew that. There was weakness in the face of Hitler that encouraged him and invites war. It is strength that deters a war and protects liberty. So I think it was, we could not have done it without Ronald Reagan, make it quite clear when he came to office. It's no good the communists thinking they could win by military might or threat of military might, because we would always outdo them. I had put up expenditure on defense even in an overall atmosphere of cutting total expenditure. So had Ronald Reagan, and his fantastic decision to go ahead with SDI was critical, because that was defense on a different level. It required great computer capability, which the Russians hadn't got. And I knew when I met Gorbachev for the first time what he would say. Please, that I tried to persuade Ronald Reagan not to go ahead with SDI. And I said, certainly, I will not try to persuade him.
And that was Marlon Maddox interviewing Lady Margaret Thatcher, who was one of the great leaders of Great Britain during a very pivotal time for them, as she led them into times of prosperity. One of the beautiful things that we continue to see is just how Lady Thatcher was continually insistent upon the need for partnership, specifically partnership with Ronald Reagan, and how she had the foresight and the vision to be able to anticipate some of those needs that were looming in the future, and really did work in the present in order that she might be prepared into the future. And one of the beautiful things that what Marlon did is he also had partnerships as well. And so we've got John Clemens on the line. Johnny there?
There we are. I'm glad we got through.
Hey, John, it's so good to have you. Now, John was a partner of Marlon Maddox for 14 years. And since that time, he's been working as the Christian news editor for USA Radio Network. John, it is so good to have you with us.
Thanks. And, I so enjoyed listening to that Margaret Thatcher interview. I remember when Marlon went to the BBC in London, he was like a little boy in a candy shop. He really enjoyed that trip, and it was very exciting to him. And he just came back with so many stories. It was incredible.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. So there's just been, it's so great to be able to see just how Point of View has continued not only just to kind of try to raise questions that are important for us to consider, but also tries to answer some of those questions that are kind of looming in the mind. And that was one of the beautiful things of what Marlon did. He recognized a need in the market to be able to provide a voice for those that are trying to defend faith, family, and freedom. And for 14 years, you were along his side to be able to help him and help the American people make sense of what's happening in the world today.
Yeah, I remember his mandate, Nick. It was all about faith, family, and freedoms. And we would scour the wire services. Of course, we didn't have the access to the, excuse me, we didn't have the access to the internet like we have today. But we would scour the wire services, the Associated Press, every available opportunity we had out there to find stories that was related to faith, family, and freedoms. And his mandate was, if it involves faith, family, or freedoms, you get it on the air as soon as you can. And that was our obligation. And, we don't have the resource material that we got today, but we had to dig into that.
And we are so grateful for some of those resources. And when we get back, we're going to talk about some of the changes that have happened over the past 45 years. And we'll be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
Numerous changes and revelations about sexual harassment are now bringing out people trying to affix blame. In the past, we blamed the perpetrator. Unfortunately, that has changed. Charlie Rose exposed himself to women who work for him. When he issued an apology, it ended up being more of a non-apology. The most important line was this: All of us, including me, are coming to a newer and deeper recognition of the pain caused by conduct in the past and have a profound new respect for women and their lives. You have to roll your eyes at the phrase all of us. No, all of us weren't engaging in behavior that got you fired at CBS and PBS. Please don't pin your behavior on the rest of us. Another response has been virtue signaling. If you check social media, you will find lots of men posting comments in order to repent on behalf of all men. Men they say are gross, lustful, and disgusting. But women, remember, we're on your side and abhor what our fellow males want to do to you. The solution to the problem of sexual harassment is twofold. First, we need to place blame where it belongs, on the perpetrators. Human sinfulness, unleashed in a world without moral rules, results in what we are reading about each day in newspapers and websites. That brings us to the second solution, moral rules. The leaders of the sexual revolution have thrown out nearly every moral rule for sexual behavior. Anything goes as long as it's consensual. But what does that even mean when men and women willingly engage in all sorts of sexual behavior? Words like virtue, chivalry, propriety were thrown out the window years ago. No wonder so many men believe that they can do just about anything sexually and get away with it. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kirby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
This is Gary Bauer in Washington, D.C., congratulating Kirby Anderson and Point of View Radio for 45 years of broadcasting excellence.
And we are back on Point of View on this December 4th, 2017 day. I am Nick Pitts, and that was Gary Bauer, just congratulating Point of View on 45 years worth of networking and programming and defending faith, family, and freedom. And we're joined on the line by John Clemens. John Clemens was co-host of Point of View with Marlon Maddox for 14 years. Since then, he's been working as the Christian news editor for the USA Radio Network. John, much has changed over this past 45 years, you might be able to say.
Yeah, it really has. It was so interesting when I first arrived at Point of View and USA Network. I was actually hired as a news person to come on board as a news anchor for the USA Network, and then I was working in Tulsa, Oklahoma, working at KRMG and radio, and also doing the Tulsa Drillers baseball games, public address announcing at night. And I came on board as a news person, but then one day I just happened to be walking toward the coffee cup and walked by the studio that Marlon was interviewing Dale Evans, of all people, Roy Rogers' wife, the late Dale Evans. And she had written a book, and it was not Dale Evans' best day. So a lot of the questions and Q&As that Marlon was having with Dale were like one-word answers, and she just wouldn't open up. And he motioned for me to come in to the studio while he was still on the air, and I opened the door very, cautiously and very quietly, and he motioned for me to sit down in the chair, and he said, talk to Dale. Here's John Clemens. Talk to Dale Evans. And she suddenly just, what it was, there was a connection there, and she opened up. It ended up being a good interview, but Marlon was having trouble with it. And ever since then, I was the co-host. So
That's phenomenal.
He said, yeah, come on in, sit down, and talk to Dale Evans. So I thank Dale Evans, the late, great Dale Evans, for the opportunity I had there with Marlon.
Well, I can just say the same is similar for me, John. If you're tuning in on Facebook right now, you might see me lying across the desk right now because I just want to kind of open it up to you, if that's okay with me right now. So yeah, for those of you that are tuning in on Facebook, facebook.com/pointofviewradio, you can see me just laying across the desk right now, ready to listen and ready to respond to whatever John's going to be asking of me. Before I open up any more, John, I'd be very interested from your perspective. What are some of the changes that you've seen over the past 45 years? I mean, you were kind of there almost at the beginning in 1972. And so what are some of those characteristics of the changes that have been happening over these past 45 years?
I remember Marlon was very enthusiastic about whatever we could do in the newsroom. And back then, we didn't have obviously the technology to do a lot of the international work that he wanted to do, because his goal was to make the USA Network sound like a major network, like a CBS or NBC or ABC. And so we got these 800 toll-free numbers from overseas, whereby that stringers or people that were working for us in filing stories could report back to us at the Dallas studio, the old studio at 2290 Spring Lake Road. And so we got these 800 numbers. And I remember Marlon's enthusiasm when he heard the very first stringer from South Africa report a story and tag it out by saying at the end, Lionel Williams, USA Radio News, Johannesburg. And that was like the best present he ever received. The technology has changed so much, satellite phone calls and cell phones and what have you. But back then, that was literally a thrill for Marlon, because that's what he always wanted. And as a kid growing up in Texas, I think it was Honey Island, Texas is where he grew up. And what he would do is he would listen late at night to the BBC and shortwave radio and the Texas State Network. And that was his goal. That was what he wanted to do. But the technology in the 45 years has been changed so dramatically. You can just pick up the telephone and talk to South Africa, or do a Skype phone call, and it's almost studio-to-studio quality that's available. Back then it was, at best, it was a scratchy phone call, a report coming in from South Africa and other countries around the world.
Yeah, I mean, you bring up such a great point. There's so much that's been made in the media and the news right now relative to kind of some of the detrimental effects of technology. I think about Pew Research has just come out with a study that indicates that we are increasingly there's a distractedness that's becoming a part of the human experience right now, just because we can't hold attention because of what technology is doing. There's a sense that there's a decrease in happiness, is what we'll talk about in the second hour, the more that we look at a phone. From a radio perspective, though, it really has bridged a communication divide that has been unmatched throughout history. I think about it from a personal level, in that I can FaceTime with my most perfect niece that is 3 years old, and all the way in the other side of the world known as Tennessee, 704.5 miles away. I can look at her, talk to her because of what technology can do. And then from a news standpoint, we're able to hear about what's going on all the way across the world, whether it's in Israel, whether it's in Turkey, whether it's in Russia, whether it's in the UK, and everything that's happening over there right now. There's just such an ability and just a benefit to be able to communicate with halfway across the world that was not anything like that 45 years ago.
Our one-on-one communication skills have suffered so much, because you can go to any restaurant in any community in this nation, and the first thing that a family will do at a family gathering dinner at a restaurant, they'll sit down, and immediately after or even before, as they look at the menu, they look at their cell phones. There's no communication between family members. It's all, or they'll text each other from one side of the table to the other. Yeah. So it's like communication, the one-on-one, talking eyeball to eyeball, just isn't there anymore.
Yeah, I completely agree. There was a study that was put out by Barna, I believe, that said 3 in 10 individuals walk and use their cell phone at some point during the day. And the sociological term for it is called a dead walker. And so 2 in 10 have admittedly walked out into the middle of the street without the right of way because they've been on their phones. And just the increase in the number of people that are being hurt by it, but also hurting others because of it. We think about distracted driving right now, and the number of accidents because of distracted driving is on the increase right now because there's, again, just this captivating allure of what technology is doing to us, and it's sucking us in, I guess you could say.
You know, Nick, we did a story on the USA Network just about a month ago about a legislator, a committee member in New Hampshire that was trying to get a law passed where police in that community would give out tickets if they saw somebody, what they call a distracted pedestrian. So many people have been injured in accidents, you know, walking literally into a crosswalk or into a street intersection with their cell phone. They're more concentrating on this telephone, and they're getting hurt. They're being injured. So, yeah, you're right. The communication is great, but sometimes it can be distracting.
So, John, this is just you and I. We're in the trust tree right now, and so I can tell you that there was a particular time, probably about a few months ago, that I was one of those people that was distracted as I was walking down the street, making my way into a meeting, and there was just one of those trees that was situated in the middle of the sidewalk, and I didn't happen to see the branch that was going a little bit lower than what I anticipated, but my forehead sure did understand that that tree was there as I knocked my forehead into that branch. But nevertheless, it does talk about some of this distractedness. And there was even an article, Sean Parker, who was on the ground floor with Napster as well as Facebook, and he was out of Axios Media was reporting this, and how they were saying how social media was really built in such a way to be able to be just a captivating, time-consuming entity. Like that was the modus operandi of some of these social media apps and these things that we find ourselves kind of consumed with on the internet. They were meant to be able to suck away time as well as some of our attention from the reality of the world that's around us.
You know, sound was so very important to Marlon. I remember when I first took on the responsibility of being a news director at USA Network, was that he always wanted to have the news people wear shirts and ties, even on the radio, because Marlon's attitude was that if you look good, you're going to sound good. So it was funny, Nick, getting dressed this morning, I was thinking to myself, you know, we used to wear a shirt and a tie going into the newsroom, and it was a hard sell to the people that we hired because we had to convince them that Marlon Maddox wanted to have good-looking and well-dressed news people on the radio because he thought they would sound better if they had a shirt and tie on. And you know what? It worked. He was absolutely right.
That's phenomenal. And so when we get back, we're going to continue to talk with John Clemens, and we'll be talking about the past 45 years, as well as not only some of the things that have changed, but what are some of the obstacles that lie ahead for radio as well as the Christian movement. And we'll be back right after this.
Why should you become a partner with Point of View Radio? Because for decades, this team has made a significant difference in lives and communities across the nation. Because America is dying for lack of biblical wisdom about life and culture. You should give because your gift will make possible cutting-edge information on issues that matter, information you won't hear anywhere else. Why? Because your gift will change lives, because you'll influence our culture with biblical truth, and because you can make a difference for the future. Our nation needs a truth team very badly. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Click on Join the Truth Team and choose your level of support. Pointofview.net or call 800-347-5151, 800-347-5151, or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, Box 30, Dallas 75221. Point of View will continue after this.
Marlon, the question you asked me, am I making this up, is how I feel sometimes when the phone rings and people bring these cases in and want help. But I'm thrilled to tell you, and again, I can only thank God's people who've responded and provided resources, people like yourself, Marlon, and you've been, we haven't talked about what the Alliance Defense Fund is, but you were one of the people with this idea. You were one of the founders, and I want to publicly thank you because we've been winning these cases because of the dream and the vision of putting together this fund to provide money where it's needed, when it's needed, to meet these crises head on.
Alan Sears is with us. He is president and general counsel for the Alliance Defense Fund. As Alan mentioned, this fund was started, 2 or 3 years ago?
We're just 2 years old.
About 2 years ago. I got a telephone call from Larry Burkett. He told me of an idea, one that I'd been thinking about for quite some time. Asked what I thought about it. Getting together some people to talk about raising some funds, not to be the lawyers or whatever in some of these cases, because they're good organizations out there, they're good lawyers. And while the American Civil Liberties Union has all the millions coming in, those of us with the traditional family values beliefs didn't have the money to fund these organizations. So we talked about getting together some men and starting an organization to raise funds. And among some of the first involved in this venture, Dr. Bill Bright, Dr. James Dobson, Dr. D. James Kennedy, Don Wildman, of course, Larry Burkett. And ladies and gentlemen, what we're doing today is kind of bringing you up to date on what the Alliance Defense Fund has done in the last couple of years. And as Alan is telling you, there are some major victories.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is
Nick Pitts.
And welcome back to Point of View. I am Nick Pitts on this December 4th, 2017 day, this National Cookie Day, one might be able to say. We've got on the phone John Clemens, who was the Point of View co-host with Marlon Maddox for 14 years. Since then, has been working as the Christian news editor for the USA Radio Network. But over this entire week, we're going to be celebrating 45 years of Point of View Radio, defending faith, family, and freedom. And what's very interesting is something that's even happening in the news today, but what we saw is Marlon Maddox interviewing one of the first presidents of that organization years ago. So many of you are very familiar with the fact that the Supreme Court will hear oral arguments Tuesday in the landmark case of Masterpiece Cake Shop versus Colorado Civil Rights Commission about whether it's right for an organization like Masterpiece Cake Shop to be able to say, no, thank you, I will not bake the cake for a gay wedding. And the organization that's leading the Masterpiece legal team is the Alliance Defending Freedom. Well, Marlon Maddox interviewed the very first president, Alan Sears, of Alliance Defending Freedom, and we're going to play that clip for you right now.
Marlon, the question you asked me, am I making this up, is how I feel sometimes when the phone rings and people bring these cases in and want help. But I'm thrilled to tell you, and again, I can only thank God's people who've responded and provided resources, people like yourself, Marlon, and you've been, we haven't talked about what the Alliance Defense Fund is, but you were one of the people with this idea. You were one of the founders, and I want to publicly thank you because we've been winning these cases because of the dream and the vision of putting together this fund to provide money where it's needed, when it's needed, to meet these crises head on.
Alan Sears is with us. He is president and general counsel for the Alliance Defense Fund. As Alan mentioned, this fund was started, 2 or 3 years ago?
We're just 2 years old.
About 2 years ago. I got a telephone call from Larry Burkett. He told me of an idea, one that I'd been thinking about for quite some time. Asked what I thought about it. Getting together some people to talk about raising some funds, not to be the lawyers or whatever in some of these cases, because they're good organizations out there. They're good lawyers. And while the American Civil Liberties Union has all the millions coming in, those of us with the traditional family values beliefs didn't have the money to fund these organizations. So we talked about getting together some men and starting an organization to raise funds. And among some of the first involved in this venture, Dr. Bill Bright, Dr. James Dobson, Dr. D. James Kennedy, Don Wildman, of course, Larry Burkett. And ladies and gentlemen, what we're doing today is kind of bringing you up to date on what the Alliance Defense Fund has done in the last couple of years. And as Alan is telling you, there are some major victories.
And that was Marlon Maddox interviewing Alan Sears, who was the first president of the Alliance Defending Freedom. And you'll notice in the interview really was Alliance Defending Freedom in the very genesis was simply just an organization that raised funds in order that it might be able to defend family values, traditional family values, as Marlon put it, in a way that only Marlon could with his commanding voice. And now what we see with ADF, the Alliance Defending Freedom, is they're not simply just raising funds, but they are the organization that is one of the premier organizations that's defending religious liberty, that's defending those traditional family values to the extent that they will be arguing oral arguments even tomorrow in the Masterpiece Cake Shop. John, we've got John Clemens on the line. That was Marlon's co-host for 14 years. Much has changed, John, but what just great foresight and visionary leadership with Marlon at the very genesis of even ADF.
You know, Nick, Marlon, I think he had the vision to have an influence on the national scene and to put the spotlight, shine a light on areas that were troubling, whether it be legislation or policies, anything that was against faith, family, and freedoms. You know, listening to people like Marlon Maddox interviewing Alan Sears of ADF, the legacy of Marlon Maddox continues to this day, 45 years after the start of a Point of View, because to this very day, we're still doing interviews with many of the people that got their start, that were guests on Point of View, that we established, that Marlon established like a phone friendship that has lasted decades. And so now, even to this day, I mean, my news budget for the day is talking to different people that I remember from 20, 30 years ago. My association with Marlon Maddox on Point of View, I'm still interviewing those people or the people that took over their positions, whether it be Dr. James Dobson or D. James Kennedy or the late Bill Bright, Larry Burkett, Don Wildman, people like that we still talk to the people that succeeded them at their ministries or at their organizations. To this very day, we're living off the legacy of Marlon Maddox.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think one of the interesting things is, and one of the things that encourages me and compels me and really does motivate me to continue to perpetuate his legacy, is it was more than simply just identifying what is wrong. right? Marlon had the microphone, he had the audience, he had the platform to be able just to point the light at issues and particular struggles that the U.S. was experiencing. Not just the U.S., but the world, rather, was experiencing. And it wasn't just simply sufficient for him to simply identify what was wrong, but then utilize his platform not only to identify what's wrong, but also to bring about what could be right, what could rectify the wrong. And I think that's one of the beautiful things and also one of the necessary things in our world today. It's more than just exercising our freedoms to be able to protest what's wrong. It's using our God-given abilities and talents to see our duty to what can we do to make it right. And Marlon was doing that, and I believe Point of View still continues to do that to this day.
Oh, to this day. You know, going back to 1972, Marlon told me the story that he was talking to somebody about, and that was right at the vanguard of satellite radio. And he was trying to get a 5-minute-long Christian teaching show on a local radio station in the Dallas market. And his question was, well, how much would 5 minutes cost me? And they came up with some figure, and he said, well, how much will 10 minutes? How much will be a half an hour? How much will be 24 hours? And it was the same price. So Marlon realized what he could do with a satellite with a channel on a satellite broadcasting to not only Dallas, but then to Houston and then different markets around the world. And all these affiliates, all these general managers, all these news directors came on board because Marlon was the voice of reason. Marlon was the voice of authority. And the voice that he had, I remember many people saying, after listening to Marlon Maddox, all the bad things that he was talking about, I suddenly feel like everything is going to be okay because he had such a soothing sound to him that uplifted people. And that was so important, whether it be 1972 or 2017, to hear Marlon's voice and the people that he talked to.
I couldn't agree more. And, you know, with Marlon, it's hard not to turn around and listen. It's hard not to be perked up when you hear his particular voice because there's just this booming, authoritative voice that comes on. In and of itself, the voice is significant. But I think even more than that, within the voice is the reason inside of it. And just the ability for Marlon, again, just to be able to stand up for what's right, but also to identify what was being wrong. It wasn't simply he was just mispainting and mischaracterizing the opposing side of the argument. Marlon was very considerate, he was thoughtful, and he was able to identify the errors in the logic and then be able to persuasively and winsomely move individuals to his side of the argument, not necessarily putting them in the lock arm and painting false dichotomies is so prevalent today, but really was just a very reasonable, considerate man.
Yeah, I remember so many times, Marlon would just, if he was doing Point of View today, he would make every effort to get some authority on today or tomorrow, or following the oral arguments at the U.S. Supreme Court, whether it be the cake artist himself, Jack Phillips, or the attorney with ADF, or General Counsel Michael Ferris, Barronell Stutzman, all the florist. He would make every attempt to try to get that person on the air so we could hear directly from that person or the attorney or somebody that could give an analytical viewpoint of why this case is so important. It's much more than a baker who refused to bake a cake.
That's phenomenal. That's phenomenal. So this is John Clemens is joining us right now. He's Point of View co-host with Marlon Maddox for 14 years. Over the entirety of this week, we will be talking about Marlon Maddox as well as just the 45-year legacy of Point of View as we continue to move into the future. And we'd love to hear from you as well. You can call in at 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. Or you can log on Facebook and give us a shout on the comment section, Point of View, or facebook.com/Point of View Radio. And we'll be back right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Can county commissioners open their own meetings with prayer? The U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit recently prohibited Rowan County's commissioners from opening their meetings with prayer. But the federal courts of appeal are split over whether prayers offered by legislators at local government meetings are unconstitutional. In another one of our cases, Bournemouth versus County of Jackson, the Court of Appeals for the Sixth Circuit approved of the very same practice. Opening government meetings with prayer is a centuries-old tradition that goes back to before the founding of our nation and continues to this day before Congress, state houses, and thousands of local governments across the country. It shouldn't be very controversial. The Supreme Court previously approved of the longstanding tradition of legislative prayer and its role in solemnizing policymaking sessions, encouraging lawmakers to selflessly seek the greater good, and acknowledging the role that faith plays in the lives of millions of Americans. In 1983 in Marsh versus Chambers and then again in Town of Greece versus Galloway, the Supreme Court held that prayers offered by private citizens before government meetings are fully consistent with the Constitution and an important part of America's history and heritage. But what if that citizen is an elected official? That's the question we hope the Supreme Court will now answer. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Hi, I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. You can protect your religious freedom by going to firstliberty.org to download your free Religious Liberty Protection Kit. Our attorneys created kits for churches, ministries, Christian schools, military members, students, and teachers, and the workplace. Get your Religious Liberty Protection Kit at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Hi, this is Josh McDowell. Kirby, I can't believe it. It's been 45 years of excellent broadcasting. Wow, it seems like 45 months. Congratulations.
And that was Josh McDowell, and I am Nick Pitts, and this is Point of View Radio on this December 4th, 2017 day. We're joined by John Clemens, who was the Point of View co-host with Marlon Maddox for 14 years, and since then, he's been working as the Christian news editor for the USA Radio Network, where he covers stories of the day that are important to Christian radio listeners. He also produces what's known as audio releases, ARs, with his YN and Diane that air on about 80 to 110 news stations. John, it is so good to have you join us again.
You know, Nick, listening to some of the people like Josh McDowell talk about the impact that Kirby Anderson and the legacy of Marlon Maddox and the whole, since 1972, what Point of View has meant for America. You know, Christian people of faith have to realize that the secular media, the general media, the big boys, the ones in the towering buildings in downtown New York, they could care less about a typical Christian radio listener, or a person of faith, or conservative. They would rather do 10 stories a day about the Kardashian sisters and what they're wearing or not wearing than what they would about stories of faith, family, and freedoms. And that's what Point of View and Kirby Anderson and your column, everything that you do, all the people that you work with, the people that you're hearing this week about 45 years of Point of View, those are the people that Point of View will bring to the microphones and tell the typical Christian radio listener why this is important to them, what is happening to their country. Long ago, they realized you can't depend upon the secular, general, dominant media. And when they do listen to the media from some of the big boys, they're going to hear fake news, and a lot of that is distorted or leaning one way or the other, mostly to the left. But with Point of View, it's right down the middle, and that's the mandate. That's the legacy that we have with Point of View in Marlon Maddox and Kirby Anderson today.
It's so true, John. I share with you. I'm tired of keeping up with the Kardashians. I've long realized I'm not going to be able to keep up with them, nor do I want to keep up with them. It's kind of exhausting to a large degree. And so as we just talk about it from an overview of 45 years and then everything that's changed, I mean, you saw it all the way back in 1972. But again, we don't live in 1972 anymore, but rather we live in 2017. And Winston Churchill had this great quote, "The further I look back into the past, the more clearly I see into the future." And so as you look into the future, what encourages you about Christianity in the U.S. today?
Well, one of the disturbing stories we just did, in fact, it's on the air today on USA Network, comes from veteran researcher George Barna, where he's talking about some very disturbing facts that he compiled over the last 15 years. And most Christians know the name George Barna, but for a 15-year period from 1991 to 2005, the average high for a person identified as a born-again Christian was about 40% of the adult population. They were qualified as a born-again Christian. Now, over that same period of time, that percentage has continued to decline. Now we've gone from 40% to 31%. So, my fear is the direction that this country is headed in. We're just what we just talked about. The Kardashian sisters are more important than issues of the day that are family, faith, and freedoms. And Marlon represented a lot of the people that he gave airtime to give them their start in the ministries that they're now working in, where they're combating some of these statistics that we get from George Barna. And just Marlon was like one of the very few people that you can say had such a lasting impact on the lives of countless people across the country, because he presented a perspective that they're not going to get from the general secular media. And I think the nation itself, America, today is a better place with the life of Marlon Maddox. And so many listeners are more educated. They know they have a different view, a different perspective on issues of the day, much differently than what they're going to get from the secular media. If anything, Marlon and Kirby Anderson and what you do every day, what Nick does every day, you give them a discerning attitude about faith, family, and freedoms. And that's why that's why we're being used by the Lord today to do something to advance his kingdom.
Yeah, that is so true. It reminds me, especially when you talk about kind of the I guess you would say the mainstream media and what's happening in New York and then here in Dallas that ripples out across the U.S. and really across the world just with the reach of Point of View. I say there are great obstacles, I guess you could say, that lie in front of us as we kind of forecast into the future. I'd love to have your insight as just an individual that's seen the past, that's lived through the past, and seen a better story as we find ourselves in today. What are going to be some of those greater obstacles that kind of lie await in the years ahead, especially for the Christian in the U.S.?
Yeah, I think the attacks against the family are just so frightening. My wife and I, Diana and I, just celebrated 50 years of marriage.
Congratulations.
And when we I know, I love that. And I'm taking her to Israel, by the way, because I figure if she can put up with me for 50 years, then she deserves a trip to Israel. That's our 50-year anniversary present to each other. But she's been there before, so she's going to be my tour guide. But the attacks against people that have been married for 50 years. What's so amazing about that? Isn't that what we're supposed to do? Is remain? Not every day is a honeymoon. I know that. People know that. But I mean, we cherish those 50 years, the peaks and the valleys, and I think so many marriages are coming under attack. So many people of faith are being ridiculed and compartmentalized. And you can do what you want to do on Sunday. Stay within the four walls of that church with that building over there with the steeple, but don't bring it out into the public arena. Don't share that with somebody, with your coworker or your neighbor or what have you. What you do on Sunday morning is up to you. The rest of the world could care less. That's my big concern about America and about the attacks against the family and the attacks against people of faith in general.
Yeah, I mean, you bring up a really great point relative to marriage. I mean, the family is the foundational building block of every good community, and when the family falters, the whole community suffers. And we think about just the redefinition of marriage, one that's happened in our life just in the past 5 years, to just even there's staggering statistics out of The Economist that was pointing to just the sheer numbers of individuals that are being unfaithful in their marriage, and just the justification of the unfaithfulness from individuals that are talking about this idea of monogamish and how there's just this option to remain faithful, but maybe there's a justification to being unfaithful that it might lead to a better life. The family really is that key component, and I'm just so grateful for places like Point of View that really are defending it.
Yeah, we'd often said, and we said the day will come that people will tell us what is wrong is right and what is right is wrong. And it's just been the antithesis of what we were brought up in. And maybe I'm a dinosaur. Maybe I'm old school. But I still maintain that faith, and I still maintain the faith that I was brought up in. And I'm surprised that the number of attacks, the daily attacks that happen against people of faith, that whether you're baking a cake or making a floral arrangement for somebody for a same-sex wedding, to say no, I don't want that business. What's so wrong about that?
Yeah.
What's so wrong about that?
Yeah. Well, John Clemens, thank you so much for joining us. John was the co-host with Point of View with Marla Maggs for 14 years. And when we get back after the break, we're going to continue talking about the news of the day, everything from a secret fund that pays Congress's indiscretions, and are we addicted to our phones? We'll be back right after this.
Modern life is go, 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 and Point of View is absolutely ready to go with you. I dare say that most of us have access to either a smartphone or a tablet, maybe even a computer that is app-based. There's a new way to keep up with Kirby and the team, the free Point of View radio app. With quick links to listen to the program live, to keep up and share Kirby's meaty and insightful viewpoints, commentaries, read articles on issues we're talking about that impact you and your family. Did you know you can also watch the show? Yes, radio with cameras. You can access that through the app as well. There's a link to our action alerts, how to find us on the radio across the nation, ways to contact us, and so much more. Visit your app store, iTunes or Google Play. Search for the Point of View radio app. There's no reason not to take us with you. The free Point of View radio app, available now for Apple and Android devices. And when you get it loaded, there's one more button I'd like you to press, the one that says Donate Now. Join Truth Team 360. Support us financially as we support you with the truth that you need. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Dan Rather is with us, speaking about objectivity. Walter Cronkite, one of the most trusted men in America, and talking about over a period of time, Here is an article I think comes out of Newsweek. It says, now the pressure off, Cronkite feels freer to speak out, particularly in defense of liberalism. And he startled an audience with remarks at a recent People for the American Way dinner published last week. Quote, I know liberalism isn't dead in this country. It simply has temporarily, we hope, lost its voice. About the Democratic loss of this election, it was just a campaign of strategy built on a defensive philosophy and so on. But one of the things I found very interesting, it said he told Jeremy Girard that there was really nothing new about this revelation, about his liberalism. He said, all through my life, I've never disguised my sentiments about politics in general. He acknowledged that he had always registered as an independent so as not to give the appearance of partisanship, but he said that, quote, liberalism came out in almost every speech in one way or another on radio. So Uncle Walter basically saying he's been a closet liberal all these years. Do you feel that he might have done a good job, fair job, or bad job of being objective?
I think he did a great job.
Okay.
I'm a great admirer of Walter Cronkite and his work. I know about these articles. Yeah. I know about these things that he said. And, you know, somebody once told President Eisenhower, never miss an opportunity to keep your mouth shut.
Yeah. So you think Uncle Walter should have done that?
Well, I don't know about that, but I know on this subject, speaking of my friend, my idol Walter Cronkite, I'm going to keep my mouth shut about that. But on his work, when he was on the air, Walter was the epitome of what an anchor person ought to be.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now,
Nick Pitts.
And welcome back on Point of View. I am Nick Pitts on this December 4th, 2017 day. This is the Point of View morning edition that's being aired live on KBDT 1160 AM, the Dallas audience. And this is the only time the Dallas audience will get a live version of this show. All other times that you will get a taped, pre-recorded show. And so this is one of the unique opportunities that the Dallas audience has to be able to call in. And so you can call in, and we're going to be talking about a variety of issues today here in the second hour. During the first hour, we had John Clemens on, and John really helped us kind of take a stroll down memory lane as we're remembering this week 45 years worth of ministry that Point of View has been doing. Marlon Maddox being the voice that defended faith, family, freedom, as well as Kirby Anderson doing that since 2004. Just these two individuals that have really helped us to be able to be a voice of reason, to be able to stand up for truth, but do so in a graceful manner. And during the second hour, we're going to be doing some of those very same things as we talk about the issues of the day and try to think about them from a biblical perspective, but do so in a winsome way and hopefully do so in a gracious way. And we'd love to have some of your phone calls. You can call in at 800-351-1212. Again, that number's 800-351-1212. And being the millennial host for today, I have to tell you about this thing called Facebook. And so we've got this live stream that's happening on Facebook right now. So you can head on over to the Facebook page and leave a comment. You can like it if you'd like, or you can leave a comment as well. And we'll be able to get to that later on in the program. And so that URL is www.facebook.com/pointofviewradio. Again, facebook.com/pointofviewradio. But one last time, I want us to take a stroll down memory lane as we look back a couple of years ago when Marlon Maddox interviewed this individual known as Dan Rather on media objectivity.
Dan Rather is with us. Speaking about objectivity, Walter Cronkite, one of the most trusted men in America, and talking about over a period of time. Here is an article I think comes out of Newsweek. It says, now the pressure off, Cronkite feels freer to speak out, particularly in defense of liberalism. And he startled an audience with remarks at a recent People for the American Way dinner published last week. Quote, I know liberalism isn't dead in this country. It simply has temporarily, we hope, lost its voice. About the Democratic loss of this election, it was just a campaign of strategy built on a defensive philosophy and so on. But one of the things I found very interesting, it said he told Jeremy Girard that there was really nothing new about this revelation, about his liberalism. He said, all through my life, I've never disguised my sentiments about politics in general. He acknowledged that he had always registered as an independent so as not to give the appearance of partisanship, but he said that, quote, liberalism came out in almost every speech in one way or another on radio. So Uncle Walter basically saying he's been a closet liberal all these years. Do you feel that he might have done a good job, fair job, or bad job of being objective?
I think he did a great job.
Okay.
I'm a great admirer of Walter Cronkite and his work. I know about these articles. Yeah. I know about these things that he said. And, somebody once told President Eisenhower, never miss an opportunity to keep your mouth shut.
Yeah. So you think Uncle Walter should have done that?
Well, I don't know about that, but I know on this subject, speaking of my friend, my idol Walter Cronkite, I'm going to keep my mouth shut about that. But on his work, when he was on the air, Walter was the epitome of what an anchor person ought to be.
Wow, fascinating insight with Dan Rather that Marlon Maddox interviewed him. And objectivity continues to be a subject of speculation, especially in this fake news era. Whether it's fake news or biased news, it's important to make the difference between the two, that fake news always being biased news not always being fake. But, our skepticism towards the media continues to pervade ourselves even to this present day. 77% of those surveyed by the Pew Research Center said the media tend to favor one side, compared with 53% who said so in 1985. So that number has risen 24%. A study released last month by the American Press Institute found that 52% of adults have some confidence in the press, whereas 41% responded by saying they have hardly any confidence in the press. The American Press Institute, in their findings, they note, quote, over the last 2 decades, research shows the public has grown increasingly skeptical of the news industry. The study reaffirms that consumers do value broad concepts of trust like fairness, balance, accuracy, and completeness. At least 2/3 of Americans cite each of these 4 general principles as very important to them. When in another Pew research, it said that 60% of baby boomers get their political news through television, compared to only 37% of millennials. But concerning Facebook, 61% of millennials receive their news from the political side from this social media giant, while only 39% of boomers. And if you've been paying attention to the news lately, Facebook has been in it because of what some consider their algorithms favoring liberal causes as well as left-leaning opinion pieces and websites. The social media network with the highest trust rating was LinkedIn, with a meager 23%. Well, I would submit to you that unbiased media is similar to a unicorn. It's a product of our imagination. Our expectation of an unbiased, completely trustworthy media comes from our fractured nostalgia, to kind of borrow a term from Yuval Levin. There was a time right after World War II where we started to have kind of that dream of an unbiased media when we had the Cronkites and the Murrows of the world, but that was an outlier in our 200-plus year history. In the infancy of the American experiment, our media was greatly biased. Thomas Jefferson, the Republican leaders, had the National Gazette. Jefferson enticed Philip Freneau to come to Philadelphia to lead the paper. Jefferson, who also was the sitting Secretary of State at the time in the Washington administration, hired Freneau as a translator at the State Department. So as a government employee, Freneau led this paper and edited the political content to such an extent that it was often directed against the Federalist Party and President George Washington. Many prominent Republicans contributed articles, often without their names, including James Madison and Thomas Jefferson. All of this was done to combat the likes of Alexander Hamilton, of Hamilton the Musical fame, who also wrote something significant called the Federalist Papers and was the first Treasury Secretary. Hamilton led the rival paper, the Gazette of the United States, and this paper was friendly to the Washington administration as well as to Federalist Party policies. The media was biased then, even more so than the perception of it now. But the goal of the media should not be unbiased objectivity, but fair and clear communication. Today, news program is often placed in between opinion shows, serving as the bread and the red meat sandwich. And if the numbers are any indication, each side of the aisle is eating their own sandwich voraciously and sharing it greatly, to the chagrin of Facebook friends and foes alike. But according to James Madison, he says that it's imperative to the flourishing of liberty and democracy that we live in a place where it's a free and open society. He would say that the advancement and diffusion of knowledge is the only guardian of true liberty. Or, as Augustine noted, a person who is good and true Christian should realize that truth belongs to the Lord wherever it is found. We will continue with Point of View right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
You know, numerous changes and revelations about sexual harassment are now bringing out people trying to affix blame. In the past, we blamed the perpetrator. Unfortunately, that has changed. Charlie Rose exposed himself to women who work for him. When he issued an apology, it ended up being more of a non-apology. The most important line was this: all of us, including me, are coming to a newer and deeper recognition of the pain caused by conduct in the past and have a profound new respect for women and their lives. You have to roll your eyes at the phrase, all of us. No, all of us weren't engaging in behavior that got you fired at CBS and PBS. Please don't pin your behavior on the rest of us. Another response has been virtue signaling. If you check social media, you will find lots of men posting comments in order to repent on behalf of all men. Men they say are gross, lustful, and disgusting. But women, remember, we're on your side and abhor what our fellow males want to do to you. The solution to the problem of sexual harassment is twofold. First, we need to place blame where it belongs, on the perpetrators. Human sinfulness, unleashed in a world without moral rules, results in what we are reading about each day in newspapers and websites. That brings us to the second solution: moral rules. The leaders of the sexual revolution have thrown out nearly every moral rule for sexual behavior. Anything goes as long as it's consensual. But what does that even mean when men and women willingly engage in all sorts of sexual behavior? Words like virtue, chivalry, propriety were thrown out the window years ago. No wonder so many men believe that they can do just about anything sexually and get away with it. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kirby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Hello, Kirby. Max Lucado here, joining with that wonderful chorus of listeners in saying thank you for the diligent service over all these many, many decades.
And this is Nick Pitts joining you on Point of View on this December 4th, 2017 day. That was Max Lucado, the prolific author down in lower southern Texas, I should say. And this is Point of View on this December 4th, 2017 day. And we are going to be taking your phone calls as well as taking some of the comments that you're offering up on Facebook right now. So you can call in at 800-351-1212, or you can go on facebook.com/point-of-view-radio to offer your comments. And so we're going to get into the day's news today. And so much has been made of this Me Too and some of the sexual allegations that continue to kind of just become more and more prevalent as the days go on. Kirby, if you were listening during the commercial break, mentioned that and some of the secret funds that have been happening. And so just to kind of give a purview of what's been happening right now, we know that Representative Blake Farenthold of Texas was the lawmaker behind the secret $84,000 that was a sexual harassment settlement. Then we also have John Conyers, who is the Democrat out of Michigan, that paid upwards of $25,000 out of this fund. And so what we continue to see is not only are women being wronged and have been wronged in the past, but now we're starting to see that there was a secret fund set up in Congress to be able to pay for this despicable behavior. The only thing more reprehensible than a secret sex fund is the sheer existence of such a fund. Budgets reveal values and demonstrate foresight. You put aside money for that which is of importance to you. You reflect on the past as you forecast into the coming year how you'll anticipate spending that hard-earned money. Our budget not only anticipates this type of behavior by our elected officials and their staff, they also plan to keep it private. Some can't keep their hands to themselves, but want to keep these despicable actions to themselves. Just as these women have said, enough is enough, we the people should echo their cry. From sea to shining sea, what started in Hollywood with Harvey Weinstein has now impacted Washington, D.C., with these individuals on the right and on the left. Since 1997, there have been more than 200 secret payouts from this fund, totaling $17 million. While not every payout in the fund is for sexual misconduct, one payout is one too many. This fund does more than just rectify the wrongs of our elected officials. It enables this type of behavior that would get the majority of us fired from our job. While we don't know the identities of these predators, we do know how the process works. According to Politico, if a congressional employee is wronged, they go to the compliance office in order to obtain a password to access the necessary forms to file a request for counseling, mediation, or a harassment claim. They are then required to undergo a mandatory mediation or counseling themselves. You heard that right. After they get a password to at least fill out the form, they themselves, the victim, has to undergo counseling or some type of mediation before they can submit the form. You're hearing that right. Then they're required, then afterwards they can formally pursue a complaint with the compliance office. It gets better. After that, a hearing officer examines their allegations and reaches a decision within 90 days. If the officer finds that a payout is necessary, the top Republican and Democrat on the House Administration Committee approved the settlement. An attorney who's represented several clients pursuing harassment claims through the compliance office said in an interview with Politico, the trappings of confidentiality, they permeate the process. The law is written to create a system to disincentivize staffers from coming forward. So not only do these victims have to undergo this onerous task of getting a password, filling out the forms, going through mediation, and then moving it to where an officer has to rule within 90 days of their form, but then the top Democrat and Republican have to agree to the payout. Then there's the quote-unquote justice rectifications of wrongs. It's both secretive and significant. This process reflects what I believe the worst-kept secret in America, our porn addiction. In 2016, over 4.5 billion hours were dedicated to watching pornographic sites on the internet. Human beings have spent 1 million years watching pornography since 2015. Surveys indicate that 79% of Americans between the age of 18 to 30 admit watching pornography regularly. 67% of men between ages 39 to 41 admit to it. And concerning men from 50 to 68, 50% confess to regular porn viewing. 1 in 3 porn users are women. As many as 12% of all websites on the internet contain pornography. Hollywood makes 400 movies a year. The porn industry produces 11,000. Every second, 28,258 users are watching pornography on the internet. Every minute, $184,538.49 is being spent on pornography on the internet. The financial cost to business productivity in the U.S. is estimated at $16.9 billion annually. These numbers demonstrate the pervasiveness of the problem, the pervertedness of the problem, but they also reveal a great demand. Where there is a demand, supply inevitably follows. And in our environment, the supply has a soul, but the men who demand their attention cast aside their manners and the woman's dignity, all for the sake of their selfish pleasure. Porn creates a demand and it alters the mind. Instead of seeing people as image bearers worthy of respect and dignity, endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights, they're seen as pleasure providers worthy of a second look, endowed by their creator with certain appealing characteristics. They're no longer people you respect, they are objects you use. The pervasiveness of pornography shows the depth of human depravity, but it also demonstrates the human need for intimacy. Pornography gives the illusion of intimacy, but it leaves the victim still lonely. Pornography's bad fruit from the rotten tree of false intimacy. Sexual harassment forces innocent victims to eat that fruit and leaves the taxpayer to foot the bill and pay for the repercussions of the porn industry. Enough is enough. But yet what we continue to see is that day in and day out, these victims continue to be empowered, thankfully, continue to be empowered to testify and to give accusations and allegations of the wrongs that have been done to them for years upon years. But thankfully, they're now being able to come out. And as they feel empowered to be able to come out and let their voice be heard for the wrongs that they've suffered all these years, let our voice be heard as well. That the idea that there is a taxpayer fund set aside that is secretive, one, and the idea that we, the people, are paying for these elected officials' wrongs, it's just incomprehensible to my mind. And so enough is enough. You have the opportunity to be able to call your lawmaker to insist that this bill is passed, that this bill would be passed to not only to bring light, the great disinfectant, as Louis Brandeis said, that light is the great disinfectant in our world today, to bring light into this, not only to see these individuals that have wronged women and robbed them of their dignity and respect they so deserve due to the inalienable rights that have been given to them by the Creator God, that you also have the opportunity to bring to light some of these individuals, but then also to vote them out of office, that these individuals are individuals that that represent us, we the people. And as George Washington said, ever so rightly, that religion and morality are the pillars upon which this society is founded upon. And it's important for us to understand who are these people that are trying to strike at the pillars of this society, that are striking at the pillars of our good democracy with their despicable behavior. And you have the opportunity. Some of the lawmakers that have introduced this bill is one being Marsha Blackburn, the Republican out of Tennessee. She's introduced legislation to be able to bring to light some of the individuals that have accessed some of these funds. It's important for us to understand, though, that these funds were more than just simply kind of these sexual misallegations that have resulted in payouts, that there's a variety of different uses for this fund as well out of the compliance office, everything from workplace injuries to certain wrongs that have been done relative to anything, really. And so this isn't just simply anyone that's had a payout out of this fund just because of sexual misbehavior, but rather there's a wide variety of issues that might have happened. But Congressman Blackburn has been doing much to be able to bring to light this fund. And so we'd love to hear from you and your comments. Do you agree? Do you disagree that this fund should even exist? Do you agree or disagree that this fund should be secretive? You can call in on the phone line. You can call in at 800-351-1212. Again, that number's 800-351-1212. Or you can log on Facebook at www.facebook.com/pointofviewradio. Again, that number is www.facebook.com/pointofviewradio. And we'll be taking your comments as well as taking your calls all throughout the next half hour before we get off air. So we'll be back right after this.
Why should you become a partner with Point of View Radio? Because for decades, this team has made a significant difference in lives and communities across the nation. Because America is dying for lack of biblical wisdom about life and culture. You should give because your gift will make possible cutting-edge information on issues that matter, information you won't hear anywhere else. Why? Because your gift will change lives, because you'll influence our culture with biblical truth, and because you can make a difference for the future. Our nation needs a truth team very badly. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Click on Join the Truth Team and choose your level of support. Pointofview.net. Or call 800-347-5151, 800-347-5151, or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, Box 30, Dallas 75221. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is
Nick Pitts.
And welcome back to Point of View on this December 4th, 2017 day. I am Nick Pitts, and I'm leading Point of View this morning. And so we are welcoming your phone call, so you can call in at 800-351-1212 or log on to Facebook, facebook.com/Point of View Radio, to offer up your point of view. And there might be a point of view on our upcoming topic. And so in a historic move, the Senate passed the tax reform bill on early Saturday morning, where Republicans are on the verge of enacting a significant legislative achievement that's really escaped them this session and this year. The Republican-controlled Senate on early Saturday morning, by a vote of 51-49, passed the historic overhaul of the U.S. tax code, which clearing what's long been considered the largest and most Byzantine hurdle in an effort that hadn't been completed in over 31 years. Talking to reporters, Leader McConnell says, "We have an opportunity now to make America more competitive and to keep jobs being shipped offshore and provide substantial relief to the middle class." He continued on and said, "At the end, there was not a single Democrat who thought this was a good idea. So now we're taking this a message to the American people a year from now." And what's fascinating is that the Senate has passed the bill. The House passed their version of the bill a little over a week, 2 weeks ago. And so now the House will take up the measure today if they will go into committee to be able to reconcile these two bills, because these are two pretty significantly different tax reform bills. And so now it's the opportunity for what's known as a kind of a reconciliation committee to come together to be able to figure out how can we reconcile these two bills and pass this unified bill to the president's desk in what could be the significant achievement of the 2017 legislative session. And so I thought it would be prudent for us to go through and to figure out what are the differences between the two bills, one, and then two, what are going to be some of those key measures that are going to be significant. And so as we walk through this, feel free to call in and voice your point of view or your question. We would be more than willing to take your phone call. That number is 800-351-1212. Or you can log on to Facebook, facebook.com/Point of View Radio, and leave a comment, and we'll be sure to get to that as well. And so let's make our way through some of the categories, shall we? So relative to corporate taxes, right now the top rate stands at 35%. In the House GOP plan, that top rate is 20% for corporations and 25% for small businesses that pass on profits to owners. Relative to the Senate GOP plan, that again would be the top rate would be 20% of corporations starting in 2019. And it would allow small business owners to deduct some earnings, pay personal tax rate on the remainder. Very little difference between the two. Relative to income taxes, this is going to be something significant for all of us Americans. And there's a pretty different take relative to the House GOP plan and the Senate GOP plan. Currently, there are 7 tax brackets at 10%, 15%, 25%, 28%, 33%, 35%, and then 39.6%. With the House plan, they moved it down to 4 brackets, 12%, 25%, 35%, and 39.6%. With the Senate plan, that is 7 brackets at 10%, 12%, 22%, 24%, 32%, 35%, and 38.5%. Relative to standard deductions, right? So currently it stands at $36,350 for singles, but for married couples it's $12,700. With the House plan, that increases the deduction to $12,000 for individuals, almost doubling it. And for married couples, it does double it to $24,000 for married couples. And that is the same in the Senate plan. So there's some similarities between the two. Relative to the alternative minimum tax, right now it currently stands that it limits certain tax benefits for high-income earners. Both the Senate and the House, again, agree and completely eliminate the AMT. Relative to the child tax credit, which is pretty significant. We mentioned this. I mentioned this in the email that I sent out called the Daily Briefing, this idea that it's a positive good for children to be raised by their families. And when they're raised by their families and the population continues to increase, this not only is a physical financial good, but this is also a biblical good as well. As we know from Psalm 127:3, that children are a heritage of the Lord, and blessed are those that have children. And so wouldn't it be prudent and wouldn't it be right to incentivize this, not only because it's a physical good, but it's also because it's a moral good as well. But nevertheless, the current law stands that it provides a $1,000 tax credit per child for families making less than $110,000 a year. In the House side, it increases the credit to $1,600, again from $1,100, so there's a $500 increase. It extends the credit to those earning $230,000. Again, it was just making less than $110,000, so it extends that credit for those making $230,000, and it adds a $300 credit per adult in the family, which is significant. Relative to the Senate side, it just increases it to $2,000. Again, the way that it stands right now is it provides the $1,000 credit. What the Senate is proposing to do is it increases the credit to $2,000 per child. Concerning the estate tax, which much has been made right now, taxes the estate property valued at more than $5.5 million and taxes it at $11 million if passed to a surviving spouse. What the House side is going to do is it increases the exemption to $11 million. Again, the exemption right now is at 5.5. What the House wants to do is exemption at $11 million and $22 million for a surviving spouse. And it repeals the tax entirely after 6 years. Very significant. Repealing the tax entirely. What does it do on the Senate side? Well, it does half of what it does on the House side. On the Senate side, it increases the exemption from $11 million, $22 million for a survivor. It does not repeal the tax. And so that will be very significant when they go into Reconciliation Committee. So relative to the mortgage interest deduction, currently, as the law stands, it allows the deduction of interest on the first $1 million of a mortgage. That's pretty significant when you're thinking about it right now, is wanting it to be advantageous for individuals to be able to purchase a home, to own property, which is very key within the American experiment. So what does it do on the House side? It limits the deduction for new mortgages to the first $500,000 on a loan. What does it do on the Senate side? It retains the deduction of interest on the first $1 million of a mortgage. That will be something interesting to continue to populate and be a topic of conversation relative to individuals trying to spur growth within the housing market. So here's something big, not necessarily big for those of us here in Texas or in Tennessee that don't have a state income tax, but it does nevertheless have for the other 48 states, state, local, and property income tax deductions. It allows taxes paid to state and property taxes to be deducted from federal taxes. What does this do on the House side? What have they decided? It eliminates the deductions for state and local taxes, caps at $10,000 the deduction for property taxes, which would be kind of advantageous. It allows individuals to be able to keep their money. What does it do on the House side? It eliminates the deductions for state and local taxes. So we'll continue to see. But what are some of these other deductions that are moving forward? The various deductions and loopholes that are allowing taxpayers to reduce their tax burden. What this does in order to simplify the process, they would say, to kind of use the postcard analogy that you can fill out your taxes on a postcard, what the House decides to do is they've repealed the deductions for medical expenses, tax preparation, personal causality losses, and limits deductions for other charitable contributions. In an effort to be able to simplify the process, they're eliminating many of these deductions, which for some in the nonprofit industry might throw their hands up in the air, especially limiting the deductions for charitable contributions. But what does it do on the Senate side? Well, it retains the deductions for charitable giving and medical expenses. So, but here's the kicker. That's something that you wouldn't be able to say, this doesn't necessarily, which one of these doesn't fit? And this is that one. So relative to the Affordable Care Act individual mandate tax, what they've done right now is, as it currently stands, it imposes tax penalties on individuals who fail to obtain health insurance. This has been a really big stickler for Republicans, especially within the past 7 years that the ACA has been a mandate. They've always been very brittle to want to, just repeal the whole thing. And one of the contentious points has been this imposing tax penalties on individuals who fail to obtain health insurance. What it does in the House side is they've made no changes to that individual mandate tax. They've decided they've made no changes whatsoever. But what they did on the Senate side on late Saturday or early Saturday morning, rather, is they repealed the individual mandate, ending tax penalties for failing to have health insurance, which is very interesting. We'll see whether that continues to move forward in the reconciliation process. So I'd love to hear your point of view. Why don't you chime in? You can call us at 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. Or you can go on Facebook and leave a comment, and we'll be sure to share that online. You can go to Facebook at www.facebook.com/pointofviewradio. And we'll be back right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Can county commissioners open their own meetings with prayer? The U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit recently prohibited Rowan County's commissioners from opening their meetings with prayer. But the federal courts of appeal are split over whether prayers offered by legislators at local government meetings are unconstitutional. In another one of our cases, Bournemouth versus County of Jackson, the Court of Appeals for the Sixth Circuit approved of the very same practice. Opening government meetings with prayer is a centuries-old tradition that goes back to before the founding of our nation and continues to this day before Congress, state houses, and thousands of local governments across the country. It shouldn't be very controversial. The Supreme Court previously approved of the long-standing tradition of legislative prayer and its role in solemnizing policymaking sessions, encouraging lawmakers to selflessly seek the greater good, and acknowledging the role that faith plays in the lives of millions of Americans. In 1983, in Marsh v. Chambers, and then again in Town of Greece v. Galloway, the Supreme Court held that prayers offered by private citizens before government meetings are fully consistent with the Constitution and an important part of America's history and heritage. But what if that citizen is an elected official? That's the question we hope the Supreme Court will now answer. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Hi, I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. You can protect your religious freedom by going to firstliberty.org to download your free Religious Liberty Protection Kit. Our attorneys created kits for churches, ministries, Christian schools, military members, students, and teachers, and the workplace. Get your Religious Liberty Protection Kit at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Hello, I'm Tim Wildman, President of American Family Association and American Family Radio. I want to congratulate Point of View radio program for 45 years of ministry. My friend Kirby Anderson's been carrying the torch ever since our dear brother Marlon Maddox passed, and I want to congratulate Kirby and the whole team there.
And this is Nick Pitts from Point of View Radio on this December 4th, 2017 day, as we are celebrating 45 years of ministry on the air, 45 years of ministry. So much has changed since 1972. I mean, Wranglers were only $12 back then. It's hard to even find a 4-pack of socks for $12, and the average new home price was roughly $27,000. Grease had its first Broadway run, so everybody was singing Grease Lightning. That was making its way on Broadway. Pong had just been introduced at the time as well, and so we've moved past Pong relative to video games, though our obsession with Pong and with other video games has continued to proliferate and grow even more bigger. But 45 years, after 45 years of ministry, and again, as you think about what Winston Churchill said, the further I look back into the past, the more clearly I see into the future. And if we look back into the past, we continue to see a stalwart defender defending faith, family, and freedom when it was first started by Marlon Maddox and his visionary leadership to be able to address the issues of the day with a very clear, very commanding, but very gracious tone, or whether it's Kirby Anderson, and Kirby Anderson continuing the mantle of Marlon Maddox, of being that reasoned voice that offers up a response of hope and grace regardless of the situation. One of the things personally, and I know that I'm a very biased opinion, that I appreciate about Point of View is that it's not afraid to ask the hard questions. They're not afraid to ask the hard questions of those who are on their side as well as those who are on the opposing side. Not mischaracterizing arguments, but really thoughtfully considering the issues of the day, recognizing the truth that everything that we are to do is to be done in love, and love always looks for the best and seeks to redeem the worst. That Point of View has always been that place to be able to offer up a reasoned hope, a reasoned response for the hope that is within us. And I'm grateful to be a part of it now, and grateful for the legacy that's come before me as we continue to offer up and speak for the messages and speak to the messages and the issues of the day. And as we think about the past, and then we figure out what we're doing and what the temperature of the culture is in the present, I thought there was an illuminating statistic today that was highlighted by Jim Dennison at the Dennison Forum. And you can go online and find out more information about the Dennison Forum at dennisonforum.org. Highly encourage you to sign up for that daily email that really does try to highlight a particular issue every day and then think about it from the biblical perspective. But one of those issues of the day is Jim mentioned some statistics that came out of Gallup that I found pretty startling, and especially from a millennial standpoint, I was just very startled by it, but also very interested, kind of digging down a little bit deeper into it. And so according to Gallup, 95% of Americans celebrate Christmas, but only 51% describe the holiday as strongly religious for them. 1 in 4 American adults say that December 25th is simply a cultural holiday, not a religious holy day. Only 49% of those who celebrate Christmas believe that the virgin birth is historically accurate. It goes to paint just this very diverse world that we're living and moving in today, specifically here in the U.S. You know, our founders believed it to be true that religion was a good thing. They believed that religion produced virtue, and virtue was a good ally of limited government. And so they sowed the seeds of virtue in the soil of our founding. And over 200 years later, we're reaping a harvest of diversity. A variety of different issues, as well as individuals that are holding different opinions, are now speaking up on some of those issues. And what we see is that they're not only holding religious beliefs, they're also holding no religious beliefs as well, as I think is illuminated in this. Only 51% of them describe the holiday as strongly religious for them. So we find ourselves again at that time of year wondering about the war on Christmas, right? Are we going to say happy holidays, or are we going to say Merry Christmas? Well, for the Christian, there's really it's a win-win situation for you regardless. So if you say happy holidays, you're just acknowledging that it is a holy day, just not explicitly Christian. And so perhaps that can be the backdoor way for you to be able to describe why it's such a holy day for you. So if an individual insists upon saying happy holidays, you can say it is a happy holy day because of what Jesus has done in being born and taking on flesh and coming into this world to be the hope of the world, and which is good news for all people, as Linus and also Luke portrayed in his gospel. But also Merry Christmas as well. We have the opportunity in some stores and in some places to be able to say Merry Christmas. And for some individuals, saying Merry Christmas often comes begrudgingly. Well, it's contradictory to say Merry Christmas in a begrudging, non-merry way, right? to be able to offer up that smile, that warmness, the selflessness that often isn't necessarily a part of this kind of shopping bonanza that we find ourselves in here during the Christmas season. That we not only have the opportunity to say Merry Christmas in this land of the free, in the home of the brave, we also have an opportunity to embody that merriness, that the reason why we can rejoice, the reason why we can hope in this world is because of the one, the creator of this world, that took on human flesh and took on our sin and shame and died the death that we deserved and lived the life that we couldn't in order to bring us home to the Father that loves us greatly and celebrates with us and rejoices over us and sings over us, is what it says in Zephaniah 3:17, which I so greatly admire and appreciate. And so you have the opportunity, yes, to say happy holidays, but also to embody the Christmas season that we find ourselves living in. Well, this has been Point of View, and I'm so grateful that you decided to tune in with us. I am Nick Pitts, and one of the unique things that I do is I work at Dallas Baptist University. I am the executive director for the Institute on Global Engagement. And what the Institute wants to do is it wants to be a catalyst for moral and cultural renewal in our society. And one of the things that we do, one of the many things that we do, is we host twice yearly big events to be able to bring in individuals from around the country to be able to offer up how do we engage in this world that we're living in. And we just confirmed on February 12th that we will be bringing in Michael Gerson. Michael Gerson was the chief speechwriter for President George W. Bush during the Bush 43 during his administration, and he also serves as a Washington Post op-ed columnist. Really is a very clear voice. He wrote a book called City of Man that was just a phenomenal little book that had a kind of a different take on what Augustine wrote in his book City of God. Highly encourage you to go onto the DBU website, www.dbu.edu, to find out more information, as well as I also write this a daily email called the Daily Briefing. In the Daily Briefing, it really does try to make sense of the news of the day. In a fake news era, you're really looking for that trusted news source. And if you're more of a hearing person, you probably find that on Point of View. But if you like to read, I would highly recommend this email to you that really does take the issues of the day as well as some of the news articles that react and help us to explain the spirit of the day and what's the biblical response to that. So, for example, some of the some of the articles that were in the Daily Briefing today is the petting zoos at the office are on the rise. Ravi Zacharias responds to some of the sexting allegations that have kind of come towards him. And then there's a minister out of the UK that's asking people to pray for Prince George to be gay. Well, what are we to think about that? Well, we're reminded of what James says in James 3:1. Not many of you should become teachers, my fellow believers, because you know that we who teach will be judged more strictly. Ravi Zacharias, how are we to think of that? 1 Peter 2:12, to live a life that's above reproach. And so you can sign up for the Daily Briefing to get that in your inbox at thebriefing.net. Again, www.thebriefing.net. You can sign up for that. And we are so grateful that you decided to join us on Point of View. If you'd like to find out more about Point of View, you can go to the website, pointofview.net, or the Facebook page, facebook.com/pointofviewradio. And we'll be back with you later on this afternoon. We'll see you then.
Why does Kirby Anderson do what he does? Because he believes in God's ability to use you to make a difference.
There's a real need for us to articulate a responsible biblical perspective and to give people an understanding of what is happening in the world, and in addition to educating them, to then empower them to go out and make a difference for Christ.
Together we can push back the growing darkness. It's not going to be easy, but by God's grace, it is happening one person, one community at a time. Join us in this mission. Become a monthly partner. $1 a day, $30 a month will make a huge difference. Or perhaps you can do $100 a month. We need partners of all sizes. We need you. Give today online at pointofview.net. At the top of the page, next to the Donate Now button, click on Become a Monthly Partner. Pointofview.net. Mail your donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, or call 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.